They said she was nothing, a ghost in silk, a woman erased by poverty in a world that worshipped gold. But when the most powerful woman in London offered her a devil's bargain, pretend to be engaged to her ruthless son or watch her family starve, Alara Whitcomb made a choice that would shake the foundations of English high society. This is the story of how a forgotten woman became a force no one could ignore. Stay until the end to see how she turned deception into destiny, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. The champagne flutes caught the candlelight like 1,000 tiny suns, casting golden reflections across the ballroom of Ashford House. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Light, practiced, expensive. Women in jewel-toned gowns glided across marble floors while men in tailored evening wear stood in clusters, discussing politics, investments, and inheritances with the casual arrogance of those who had never known want. Alara Whitcomb stood at the edge of it all, a shadow in pale blue silk, 26 years old. Once the daughter of a respected merchant with ties to minor nobility. Now, a curiosity. A cautionary tale whispered behind gloved hands. The girl whose father had gambled everything on a shipping venture that sank, literally, taking 3 vessels, 200,000 pounds, and the Whitcomb family standing with it to the ocean floor. She lifted her glass of champagne, her second of the evening, nursed carefully because she couldn't afford to accept a third without seeming desperate, and let her gaze drift across the room. Familiar faces. Familiar coldness. Lady Pemberton, who had once invited Alara to private teas, now turned her powdered cheek as though Alara carried plague. Lord Ashford himself, hosting this glittering circus, had greeted her with the kind of thin smile reserved for servants who'd forgotten their place.
Still clinging to the edges, I see.
The voice came from her left, sharp, female, laced with amusement. Alara didn't turn. She knew the speaker. Miss Caroline Hartley, daughter of a textile magnate, blessed with a fortune large enough to forgive her utterly average face and spectacularly cruel tongue. Someone must occupy the margins, Caroline, Alara said evenly, her gaze still fixed on the dancers. Otherwise, how would people like you define the center? Caroline's laugh was like ice cracking. Still clever, even now. How quaint. Tell me, Alara, do you plan to stand here all evening? Or are you hoping some desperate second son will mistake you for someone who still matters? Alara finally turned, meeting Caroline's eyes with a calm that had taken 2 years of humiliation to perfect. I'm here because I was invited. If my presence offends you, perhaps you should examine why that is. Invited, Caroline repeated, savoring the word. Out of pity, you mean? Lady Ashford has such a generous heart for the fallen. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. But generosity has limits, darling. Even she won't be able to keep propping you up forever. Eventually, you'll have to face facts. You're invisible now, and invisible women don't get second chances. With a rustle of rose-colored taffeta, Caroline swept away, leaving Alara alone again in the crowd. Invisible. The word settled over Alara like snow, cold, suffocating, impossible to shake off. Because Caroline was right. Not about everything, never about everything, but about enough. Since her father's death 3 years ago, since the creditors had come like vultures and stripped their London townhouse bare, since her mother had retreated into illness and her younger sister Margaret had grown thin and quiet with hunger, Alara had learned exactly how quickly society could erase a woman. She'd fought it at first, tried to maintain appearances, keep connections, smile through the shame, but poverty was a stain that no amount of dignity could wash away. Invitations dwindled, friends vanished. The world she'd grown up in, a world of garden parties and charitable committees and marriage prospects, had closed its doors and bolted them shut. And the worst part? The silence. The way people looked through her now, as though she were made of glass, as though acknowledging her existence might somehow contaminate them with failure. Alara set her champagne down on a passing servant's tray, her hand steady despite the rage coiling in her chest. She'd come tonight because Lady Ashford had sent a personal note, an unusual gesture that had briefly kindled hope, perhaps an opportunity, perhaps a connection, perhaps something, anything, that might ease the crushing weight of keeping her family alive on needlework commissions and the charity of distant relatives who made sure she knew it was charity. But 3 hours into this glittering hell, and nothing. No opportunities, no connections, just the slow, familiar torture of being present but erased. She turned toward the French doors leading to the terrace, seeking air, escape, anything but another moment of standing in a room full of people who refused to see her. "Miss Whitcomb!" The voice stopped her mid-step, low, female, absolutely commanding. Alara turned slowly, and her breath caught. Duchess Helena Vale stood less than 3 feet away, a figure carved from power and expensive fabric. 70 years old, with silver hair swept into an elaborate coiffure and eyes like chips of black ice. She wore midnight blue velvet that must have cost more than Alara's family had earned in the past year, and she carried herself with the absolute certainty of a woman who had never once questioned her right to rule every room she entered. The Duchess of Thornbury, widow of the late Duke Edmund Vale, mother of the current Duke, Adrian Vale, a man whose reputation preceded him like thunder. Brilliant, ruthless, notoriously private, and utterly disinterested in marriage despite being 32 and under immense pressure to produce an heir. Alara had never spoken to Duchess Helena, had never expected to. The woman existed in a stratosphere so far above Alara's current station that they might as well have lived on different continents. "Your Grace," Alara managed, dropping into a curtsy that her body executed automatically despite her shock. "Walk with me." It wasn't a request. The Duchess turned and moved toward the terrace doors with the kind of gliding grace that suggested she'd been trained from birth to walk as though the ground beneath her feet was privileged to bear her weight. Alara followed, her heart hammering, her mind racing through 1,000 possibilities and finding none that made sense. The terrace was cooler, quieter. London stretched out below them, a sprawl of gaslight and shadow. The sounds of the ballroom faded to a muffled hum behind closed glass. Duchess Helena stopped at the stone balustrade, her gloved hands folded before her. She didn't look at Alara. Instead, she gazed out at the city as though it were a chessboard she was contemplating. "You're educated," the Duchess said abruptly. "Your father ensured that. French, Italian, decent grasp of literature and history. You can hold a conversation without embarrassing yourself. You have adequate manners despite your current circumstances." Alara's spine stiffened. "I'm honored that your Grace has taken an interest in my qualifications," she said carefully, "though I confess I'm uncertain as to why." "Don't be coy. You're desperate. I'm pragmatic. That makes us potentially useful to one another." The bluntness was like a slap. Alara's hands clenched at her sides, but she kept her voice level. "I'm listening." Finally, Duchess Helena turned to face her. The moonlight carved harsh lines into her aristocratic features. "My son is a brilliant man. He's also a stubborn fool who believes he can avoid marriage indefinitely while the vultures of Parliament and the gossip mills circle closer every day. The Vale line is ancient. It requires an heir. Adrian's refusal to even entertain the notion of a wife has become a liability." "I'm aware of His Grace's reputation," Alara said slowly, "though I fail to see what this has to do with me. He needs a fiancée." The words dropped like stones into still water. "Someone respectable enough to silence the gossips. Someone intelligent enough not to bore him. Someone who won't actually expect him to marry her." Alara's breath stopped. "You're asking me to pretend." Duchess Helena's smile was razor thin. "For 3 months. You'll be introduced as his intended. You'll appear at his side at necessary functions. You'll play the role of a woman content to wait while he settles his affairs before the wedding. And at the end of 3 months, there will be a quiet, mutually agreed upon separation. No scandal, no shame. He'll have bought himself time, and the pressure will ease. And in exchange?" Alara's voice sounded distant to her own ears. £50,000, paid discreetly upon completion. Enough to settle your debts, secure your family's future, and disappear into comfortable obscurity if you're wise. £50,000. The number detonated in Alara's mind like cannon fire. £50,000. More than her father had lost. More than enough to save her mother from the slow death of poverty. More than enough to give Margaret a dowry, a future, a chance at the life she deserved. More than enough to buy back everything Alara had lost. "Why me?" she asked, her throat tight. "There must be hundreds of women more suitable. Women with titles, connections, reputations. Women with expectations," Duchess Helena cut in. "Women who would demand marriage, not performance. Women who would cling and scheme and turn a simple arrangement into a catastrophe. Her eyes narrowed. You, Miss Whitcomb, are desperate enough to agree and intelligent enough to succeed. More importantly, you're invisible. No one will question why you'd accept such an arrangement, and when it ends, no one will mourn its passing. Invisible. There was that word again, weaponized now, turned into currency. And if I refuse? Alara asked quietly. Duchess Helena's expression didn't change. Then you'll return to your drafty little rental in Bloomsbury, continue selling needlework to ladies who pity you, and watch your sister fade into the same obscurity that's already consumed you. Your choice, Miss Whitcomb. But choose quickly. My patience has limits. Alara turned away, gripping the cold stone balustrade until her knuckles went white. Her mind was a storm. Pride screamed at her to refuse, to tell this imperious woman exactly where she could put her devil's bargain. But pride was a luxury she'd lost the right to afford. 3 months, £50,000, a lifetime of security. All she had to do was pretend, lie, become an actress in a drama written by the powerful for the powerful. He'll despise me, Alara said softly. Your son. He'll know I'm a fraud. Adrian despises most things, Duchess Helena replied, but he'll tolerate you if I command it. And tolerance, Miss Whitcomb, is all this arrangement requires. Alara closed her eyes, saw her mother's hollow cheeks, Margaret's worn shoes, the stack of unpaid bills hidden in the desk drawer, the slow, grinding death of dignity that poverty inflicted day by day. And she saw something else, too. A chance. Not for love, not for redemption, but for survival. When she opened her eyes, her decision was made. I'll do it, she said, but I have conditions. Duchess Helena's eyebrow arched. You're hardly in a position to negotiate. Then you're free to find another desperate woman to humiliate, Alara shot back, her voice hard. But if you want me, here are my terms. The money is paid in installments, not as a lump sum at the end. 5,000 immediately to secure my agreement. 5,000 at the midpoint, the remainder upon completion. That way, if your son decides to throw me to the wolves halfway through, I'm not left with nothing. Silence. The Duchess studied her with something that might have been approval, or amusement, or both. Clever, she murmured. Anything else? My family is never mentioned, not to your son, not to society, not to anyone. This arrangement is between you and me. They remain protected and anonymous. Agreed, though I must warn you, Adrian will investigate you. He trusts no one, least of all me. Let him, Alara said. He'll find a woman whose family fell from grace through bad luck and worse judgment. Nothing more. Duchess Helena extended one gloved hand. Then we have an accord, Miss Whitcomb. Welcome to the game. Alara took her hand. The Duchess's grip was iron wrapped in silk. One more thing, Duchess Helena added, her voice dropping. Adrian doesn't know about this arrangement. As far as he's concerned, you're a woman I've deemed suitable and he's being introduced to at my insistence. He'll resist. He'll test you. He'll try to drive you away. Your task is to endure it and make him believe the fiction. You're asking me to deceive your own son. I'm asking you to save him from his own stubbornness, the Duchess corrected coldly. There's a difference. Alara pulled her hand back, her heart pounding. When do I meet him? Tomorrow, 2 o'clock. My residence. Don't be late, and for heaven's sake, wear something less pathetic than that gown. The Duchess swept past her, pausing at the door. Oh, and Miss Whitcomb, if you think standing at the edge of a ballroom was uncomfortable, wait until you're standing at the center of Adrian's world. It's far less forgiving. The door clicked shut behind her. Alara stood alone on the terrace, the London night pressing in around her, and let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. What had she just agreed to? The next afternoon, Alara stood before the towering facade of Thornbury House in Belgravia, her hands clenched inside a borrowed muff, her stomach a knot of ice. The building was a monument to wealth. White stone, columns, windows that gleamed like judgment. A butler answered the door before she'd even knocked, as though he'd been waiting for her, watching. Miss Whitcomb, Her Grace is expecting you. This way. She followed him through halls lined with portraits of stern-faced veils, each one seeming to glare down at her with suspicion. The air smelled of beeswax and old money. Her boots, scuffed, resoled twice, whispered against marble that probably cost more than her childhood home. They stopped before a set of double doors. The butler knocked once, then opened them without waiting for an answer. "Miss Alara Whitcomb, Your Grace." Alara stepped inside. The study was vast. Shelves of books climbed to a ceiling painted with mythological scenes, gods and mortals locked in eternal struggle. A fire crackled in a marble hearth, and standing before it, silhouetted against the flames, was a man who radiated the kind of power that didn't need to announce itself. Adrian Vale, Duke of Thornbury, turned to face her. Alara's breath caught. He was nothing like she'd imagined. Tall, yes, over 6 feet, broad-shouldered beneath a perfectly tailored black coat. But it was his face that stopped her. Sharp cheekbones, dark hair pushed back carelessly, eyes the color of winter storms. Handsome in the way a blade was handsome, beautiful and utterly dangerous. And those eyes, they dissected her, took her apart piece by piece in the span of 3 seconds. "So," he said, his voice low and edged with contempt, "you're the latest candidate my mother has dragged before me." Not a greeting, not even a pretense of courtesy, just cold, immediate dismissal. Alara forced herself to breathe. "Your Grace," she said, dropping into a curtsy that felt like surrender. "Spare me the theatrics." Adrian moved toward his desk, each step deliberate. "Let me guess. My mother promised you money, status, or both. She painted a pretty picture of life as a duchess. She neglected to mention that I have no intention of marrying anyone, least of all a stranger she's plucked from obscurity." "Actually," Alara said, lifting her chin, "your mother promised me 3 months of pretending to be engaged to you, £50,000, and then a quiet exit from your life. So if we're dispensing with theatrics, Your Grace, perhaps we could also dispense with the assumption that I'm here because I harbor romantic delusions." Silence. Adrian's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Surprise. Or perhaps respect. Hard to tell. "She told you about the arrangement," he said slowly. "Every detail. And you accepted anyway. I'm here, aren't I?" He studied her for a long moment, then laughed. A short, sharp sound devoid of humor. "Unbelievable. She's gotten bolder in her manipulations." He moved to a sideboard, poured amber liquid into a crystal glass. Didn't offer her one. "Tell me, Miss Whitcomb, are you brave or simply desperate?" "Does it matter?" "It does if you're going to convince anyone that we're genuinely interested in each other." He took a drink, his gaze never leaving hers. "Because right now, you look terrified. And I look like I'd rather be anywhere else. Not exactly the foundation of a believable romance." Alara's hands tightened in her muff. "Then perhaps Your Grace should endeavor to look slightly less hostile, and I'll endeavor to look slightly less aware that I'm being inspected like livestock." Another flicker in his eyes. Definitely respect this time. "You have a spine," Adrian said. "That's unexpected. Most women my mother parades through here simper and giggle and pretend they don't understand why I find them insufferable. I'm not most women." "No," he agreed quietly. "You're not." He set his glass down, leaned against the desk, arms folded. "Very well, Miss Whitcomb. Let's establish ground rules. This is a business arrangement, nothing more. We'll appear together when absolutely necessary. We'll maintain the fiction in public, but in private, we're strangers. Understood?" "Perfectly." "You'll live here. Separate wing, naturally. My mother will insist on it for appearances." "Of course." "And when the 3 months are up, you'll leave. No dramatics, no last-minute revelations, no attempts to extend the arrangement. £50,000 and a clean exit. Agreed?" Alara met his stare head-on. "Agreed, on one condition." His eyebrow arched. "You're making demands now?" "I won't be treated like a servant or a toy. In public, you'll show me basic respect. You don't have to like me, Your Grace, but you will not humiliate me." The silence stretched between them like wire pulled taut. Then Adrian smiled, a slow, dangerous curve of his mouth. "You know what, Miss Whitcomb? I think I might actually survive 3 months of you." It wasn't warmth, it wasn't even kindness, but it was acknowledgement, and for now, that would have to be enough. "When do we begin?" Alara asked. "Tomorrow night. The Haverford Ball. Every vulture in London society will be there. We'll make our first public appearance together." He straightened, suddenly all business. "My mother will have appropriate clothing sent to you. Wear it. Look the part. And for God's sake, smile occasionally. We're supposed to be infatuated, not negotiating a treaty. I'll do my best to appear besotted, Elara said dryly. See that you do. Adrian moved past her toward the door, then paused. One more thing. Don't fall in love with me, Miss Whitcomb. Women tend to do that, despite my best efforts to dissuade them. It would complicate things unnecessarily. Laura turned to face him, a smile ghosting across her lips. I wouldn't worry, Your Grace. I've seen far too much of what love costs to ever mistake this arrangement for anything resembling it. For a moment, just a heartbeat, something shifted in Adrian's expression. Recognition, perhaps, or kinship. Then it was gone, replaced by cool indifference. Good, he said. Then we understand each other. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Elara stood alone in the vast study, surrounded by the weight of centuries of Vale family history, and realized with sudden, crystalline clarity that she'd just stepped onto a battlefield. And the enemy wasn't Adrian Vale. It was the entire world that would watch them, judge them, and wait hungrily for them to fail. She squared her shoulders, took a breath, and walked back out into the hall. Let them watch. She'd spent 3 years being invisible. Now, for better or worse, she was about to become impossible to ignore. The gown arrived the next morning in a box lined with tissue paper, emerald silk with black lace overlay, cut to perfection, worth more than everything Elara currently owned combined. A note tucked inside, written in Duchess Helena's sharp script. Armor comes in many forms. Wear this well. H.V. Elara dressed slowly that evening, her hands steadier than they should have been. Margaret helped with the laces, her eyes wide with questions she didn't ask. Their mother watched from the doorway, pale and uncertain. Elara, she whispered, what is this really about? Elara met her mother's gaze in the mirror. It's about survival, Mama. Nothing more. Trust me. And the Duke is part of the arrangement, that's all. It wasn't all, but it was all she could afford to explain. When the carriage arrived, Vale family crest gleaming on the door, Elara kissed her mother's cheek, squeezed Margaret's hand, and stepped out into the cold London night. The Haverford ball blazed with light and noise and the predatory glitter of high society at its finest. Elara descended from the carriage alone, chin high, and felt every eye turn toward her. Whispers rippled through the crowd like fire through dry grass. Who is she? That's the Whitcomb girl. What is she doing here? And then Adrian appeared at her side, materializing from the crowd like a storm-given human form. He offered his arm without a word, his expression carefully neutral. Elara took it, her fingers light against expensive wool. Breathe, he murmured, so quietly only she could hear. And whatever happens, don't let them see you break. They walked into the ballroom together, and the game began. The crystal chandeliers cast fractured light across 1,000 faces, and every single one of them was staring. Elara's fingers rested lightly on Adrian's arm as they moved through the Haverford ballroom. But beneath the silk of her glove, her hand trembled. Not from fear, though there was plenty of that, but from the sheer overwhelming sensation of being seen again. After 3 years of invisibility, the sudden weight of collective attention felt like being pressed beneath glass. They're watching, she murmured. Of course they are. Adrian's voice was low, barely audible over the orchestra. This is what passes for entertainment among the idle rich. Watching their peers get devoured. Comforting. I didn't promise comfort, Miss Whitcomb. I promised a performance. They reached the edge of the dance floor. Adrian turned to face her, his expression carefully composed into something that might pass for mild interest if you didn't look too closely at the ice in his eyes. We should dance, he said. It's expected. I'm aware of what's expected, Your Grace. His hand found her waist. She placed her palm against his shoulder. The orchestra swelled into a waltz, and they moved together with the mechanical precision of two people executing choreography rather than sharing intimacy. Around them, the whispers grew louder. Can't possibly be serious. Whitcomb family lost everything. What is Helena thinking? Elara kept her gaze fixed somewhere past Adrian's shoulder, her smile locked in place like armor, but she could feel the judgment radiating from every corner of the ballroom. Lady Pemberton's scandalized expression, Lord Ashford's raised eyebrows, Caroline Hartley's venomous smirk. You're breathing too fast, Adrian observed. They'll think you're nervous. I am nervous. Then hide it better. Pretend you're bored. These people respect nothing except absolute confidence. He spun her through a turn, his grip firm. Or have you forgotten you're supposed to be besotted with me? Alara finally met his eyes. Forgive me, Your Grace. I'm still learning how to feign affection for a man who looks at me like I'm a particularly tedious obligation. Something flickered across Adrian's face. Surprise, perhaps, or amusement. Fair point. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Then let me give you something to work with. Smile. Look at me like I've just said something charming. In 3 seconds, I'm going to laugh, and you're going to blush. I don't blush on command. He laughed. It was a warm, genuine sound that transformed his entire face. And despite herself, despite everything, Alara felt heat rise to her cheeks. The effect on the watching crowd was immediate. The whispers shifted in tone. Speculation replaced mockery. Curiosity edged out contempt. There, Adrian murmured. That's better. Now they're wondering if we might actually be legitimate. You're a very good actor, Your Grace. So are you, Miss Whitcomb. The music swelled toward its conclusion. Remember that, because the real test hasn't even started yet. The waltz ended. They separated, and Adrian led her off the floor with the kind of possessive attention that sent another ripple of speculation through the room. Before Alara could catch her breath, they were surrounded. Adrian, darling! A woman in crimson silk materialized at his elbow, Lady Beatrice Cunningham, daughter of an earl, notoriously ambitious and spectacularly beautiful. You've been hiding from us all season, and now you appear with such unexpected company. The pause before unexpected was deliberate, cutting. Lady Beatrice. Adrian's tone was polite but cold. May I present Miss Alara Whitcomb? Alara, Lady Beatrice is an old family friend. How charming. Beatrice's smile didn't reach her eyes as she examined Alara like a naturalist studying an unusual insect. Whitcomb. That name sounds familiar. Weren't you at the Ashford gathering last week? Standing by the terrace doors, if I recall. All alone. I was, Alara said evenly. It's remarkable what one notices when one takes the time to actually observe. Beatrice's smile sharpened. Indeed. And now here you are, on the arm of one of London's most eligible bachelors. Quite the transformation. One might almost call it calculated. One might, Alara agreed, if one were inclined toward cynicism. Fortunately, I prefer to think of it as fortunate timing. Fortunate for whom, I wonder? Adrian's hand found the small of Alara's back, a gesture of support that looked like intimacy. Fortunate for me, Beatrice, though I'm surprised you're so interested in my personal affairs. I was under the impression you'd set your sights on Lord Harrington. Beatrice's composure cracked just slightly. Lord Harrington and I are merely acquaintances. How disappointing for him. Adrian's smile was razor sharp. If you'll excuse us, I'd like to introduce Alara to the Haverford Duchess before the evening ends. They moved away, leaving Beatrice standing alone in a pool of barely suppressed fury. You're making enemies, Alara said quietly. I've had enemies since birth, Adrian replied. At least now you're learning to make them too. Consider it training. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of introductions, each one more exhausting than the last. Duchess Haverford, ancient, sharp-eyed, and terrifyingly perceptive. Lord and Lady Rothschild, kind but clearly confused by Adrian's sudden interest in a woman they barely remembered. Sir Charles Whitmore, who'd known Alara's father and whose pity was somehow worse than anyone's contempt. Through it all, Alara smiled, spoke when spoken to, maintained the careful fiction that she was a woman who belonged in this world, who hadn't spent the last 3 years selling embroidered handkerchiefs to survive. And Adrian played his part flawlessly, attentive without being effusive, protective without being possessive, just distant enough to seem genuine. It should have been exhausting. It was exhausting. But there was something else too, a strange electric current running beneath the performance, every time Adrian's hand brushed hers, every time he leaned close to whisper a warning or observation, every time their eyes met across a crowded room. It wasn't real. She knew that, but it felt real, and that was dangerous. Finally, mercifully, the evening ended. They stood at the top of the Haverford stairs as their carriage was called, and Alara allowed herself one moment of weakness. She closed her eyes and exhaled. Tired? Adrian asked. Exhausted. Good. That means you worked hard enough to be convincing. He offered his arm again. One more gauntlet to run. My mother's waiting at Thornbury House. She'll want a full report. Alara's eyes snapped open. Tonight? She doesn't sleep much, claims it's a waste of time. They descended the stairs together. Welcome to the Vale family, Miss Whitcomb. We're relentlessly efficient, even in our cruelty. The carriage ride passed in silence. Alara stared out at the London streets, watching gaslight blur past, and tried to process everything that had just happened. The stares, the whispers, the careful, calculated performance of being someone she wasn't. You did well, Adrian said abruptly. Alara turned to look at him. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something caught between assessment and reluctant approval. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me. I'm simply acknowledging a successful business transaction. You upheld your end of the bargain. I upheld mine. That's all this is. Of course. But the words felt hollow, and from the way Adrian's jaw tightened, she suspected he knew it too. Thornbury House loomed ahead, its windows blazing with light despite the late hour. The moment they stepped inside, Duchess Helena appeared in the entrance hall like a specter summoned by their arrival. Well? She demanded. It went as expected, Adrian said, already moving toward his study. The vultures circled. We survived. Miss Whitcomb performed adequately. Adequately? Helena's eyebrow arched. I heard you danced with her, publicly, and smiled. Adrian paused mid-step. Your spy network is as efficient as ever, Mother. It's not spying when half of London is eager to report back to me. They're already placing bets on how long this will last. Let them bet. Adrian's voice was cold. As long as they believe the fiction, their opinions are irrelevant. He disappeared into his study without another word, the door closing with quiet finality. Helena turned her attention to Alara. Come, we need to talk. They moved to a sitting room done in cream and gold, elegant and intimidating in equal measure. Helena poured 2 glasses of sherry, handed one to Alara, and settled into a chair with the air of a general reviewing battlefield reports. Beatrice Cunningham engaged you directly, Helena said. It wasn't a question. She did. She implied I was calculating. A fortune hunter. And your response? I deflected, politely. Good. Beatrice is a viper, but she's a connected viper. You can't afford to make an outright enemy of her. Helena sipped her sherry. Not yet, anyway. Alara set her glass down untouched. Your Grace, may I ask you something? You may ask. I may not answer. Why are you really doing this? The arrangement, the deception, it's an extraordinary amount of effort for a problem that could be solved by simply letting your son remain unmarried a while longer. Helena's eyes narrowed. You think I'm doing this for him? Aren't you? I'm doing this for the Vale family, for a legacy that survived wars, plagues, and political upheavals. Adrian is brilliant, but he's also stubborn to the point of self-destruction. He believes he can avoid marriage indefinitely, while Parliament circles and rivals position themselves to absorb our influence the moment our line falters. She leaned forward, her gaze pinning Alara in place. I won't let that happen. And if I have to manipulate my own son to ensure it, so be it. And when the 3 months end, when the arrangement dissolves, by then Adrian will have seen what it means to have a partner, even a temporary one. He'll understand that marriage doesn't have to be the trap he fears. And perhaps, just perhaps, he'll be open to finding someone real. Helena's smile was thin. Or he'll remain as intractable as ever, and I'll have to find another solution. Either way, you'll have your £50,000 and your freedom. Alara stood. Her legs felt like water, but she kept her spine straight. Then I hope I prove worth the investment, Your Grace. You already have. You didn't crumble under Beatrice's attack. You didn't embarrass Adrian or yourself, and you looked the part. A woman who belongs in this world, even if you no longer do. Helena rose as well. Tomorrow, we begin in earnest. You'll move into Thornbury House. Adrian's secretary will provide you with a schedule of necessary appearances. Study it, memorize it, and remember, this may be performance, but the consequences are real. Alara nodded once, then turned to leave. Miss Whitcomb? She paused at the door. My son is not an easy man. He's been hurt, betrayed, taught to trust nothing and no one. If you expect warmth or kindness, you'll be disappointed. But if you can endure his coldness, you may find something else beneath it, something worth discovering. I'm not here to discover anything, Your Grace. I'm here to survive. Helena's laugh was soft and utterly without humor. In this world, Miss Whitcomb, those are often the same thing. The next morning, Alara stood in the cramped sitting room of her family's Bloomsbury rental, watching as her meager belongings were packed into a single trunk. Margaret sat on the threadbare sofa, her face pale and strained. 3 months, Margaret said quietly. And then what? And then we have money, security, a future. Alara knelt before her sister, taking her hands. I know this is strange. I know it's happening fast, but trust me, Meg. I wouldn't do this if there was any other way. You're moving into the home of a man you barely know, pretending to be his fiancée. Alara, what if what? He mistreats me? He won't. It's a business arrangement, nothing more. We'll barely see each other except when absolutely necessary. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. You're sacrificing yourself, again, just like you did when you sold all your jewelry, when you took in needlework, when you gave up everything so Mama and I could eat. I'm not sacrificing anything, Alara said firmly. I'm making a choice, a smart choice, and when it's done, we'll all be free. Her mother appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a shawl despite the fire crackling in the grate. The Duke, she said. Do you care for him at all? Alara stood, releasing Margaret's hands. No, Mama, I don't. This isn't a love story. It's survival. But even as she said it, she remembered Adrian's hand at her back, his whispered warnings, the way he'd defended her against Beatrice's cruelty. Small things, meaningless things, weren't they? The Vale carriage arrived at noon, conspicuous and gleaming on their shabby street. Neighbors peered from windows, whispering. Alara kissed her mother and sister goodbye, promised to write, and climbed inside. Thornbury House swallowed her whole. The room she'd been given was larger than her entire family's current sitting room, all pale blue walls and silk curtains and a bed that could have slept 4. A lady's maid appeared within minutes of her arrival, a severe woman named Mrs. Blackwood, who helped her unpack with the kind of silent efficiency that made Alara feel even more like an imposter. His Grace requests your presence in the study at 3 o'clock, Mrs. Blackwood said, hanging Alara's single decent day dress in a wardrobe that dwarfed it. He'll review your schedule for the coming weeks. Thank you. Mrs. Blackwood paused at the door. Miss Whitcomb, if I may, you'll find His Grace to be exacting. He expects punctuality, discretion, and competence. If you can provide those 3 things, you'll do well here. And if I can't, then you won't last the week. The door closed. Alara sank onto the edge of the enormous bed and stared at her reflection in the gilt-framed mirror across the room. A stranger stared back. A woman in borrowed clothes, living in a borrowed life, playing a borrowed role. She'd agreed to this, chosen it. But the reality of it, the sheer, overwhelming magnitude of the deception, was only now beginning to settle over her like snow. At precisely 3 o'clock, she knocked on Adrian's study door. Enter. He sat behind his desk, surrounded by papers and ledgers, his shirt sleeves rolled up and his dark hair disheveled as though he'd been running his hands through it. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. Sit. Alara sat. Adrian slid a sheet of paper across the desk toward her. Your schedule. Opera on Friday. Lady Weston's garden party on Sunday. The Rothschild dinner next Tuesday. Parliamentary reception the following week. All mandatory. All requiring your presence at my side. Alara scanned the list. 12 events in 3 weeks. This is extensive. This is what you agreed to. Adrian leaned back in his chair. You'll need appropriate clothing for each occasion. My mother's arranged for a modiste to visit tomorrow. She'll take your measurements and provide suitable gowns. Your Grace, I can't possibly accept. You can and you will. Consider it part of the arrangement. You're representing the Vale family now. Looking the part isn't optional. Alara's hands tightened in her lap. I understand. Do you? Adrian stood, moving to the window. He stared out at the gardens, his shoulders tense. I wonder, you're playing at being something you're not, Miss Whitcomb. Wearing expensive gowns, attending society functions, pretending you belong. But beneath it all, you're still that woman standing alone at the Ashford ball. And sooner or later, someone will see through the fiction. Then I'll simply have to ensure they don't. He turned to face her. You're very confident for someone whose entire life is a lie right now. So is yours, Your Grace. The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Adrian's eyes narrowed, but there was something else there too, a flicker of recognition, perhaps even respect. Touché, he said quietly. At least you're honest about the dishonesty. That's refreshing. He returned to his desk, pulling out another document. There's something else. My cousin, Lord Edmund Carrington, is arriving from the country next week. He's persistent and deeply suspicious of sudden changes in my personal life. He'll investigate you, question you, try to find cracks in the story. Why would your cousin care who you're engaged to? Adrian's laugh was bitter. Because if I die without an heir, Edmund inherits everything. The title, the estates, the fortune. He spent his entire life waiting for me to either marry unsuitably or die conveniently. My sudden engagement to a woman he's never heard of will put him on high alert. Alara's stomach tightened. What do you want me to do? Convince him. Be charming, believable, utterly unremarkable in your devotion to me. If Edmund suspects this is a charade, he'll expose it. And when he does, the scandal won't just ruin you. It'll destroy my family's reputation and give him exactly the ammunition he needs to challenge my position. No pressure, then. I'm being honest with you, Miss Whitcomb. This arrangement comes with risks, real ones. If you're not prepared to handle them, tell me now. Alara stood, meeting his gaze across the desk. I'm prepared, Your Grace, whatever it takes. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Two people bound by necessity, separated by truth, and caught in a web of mutual deception that was growing more complicated by the hour. Then we'd better make sure you're ready, Adrian said finally. Because Edmund Carrington doesn't just test people, he breaks them. The week that followed was a baptism by fire. Days blurred into a relentless cycle of preparation and performance. The modiste arrived with fabrics and patterns, transforming Alara into a living doll dressed in silks and velvets she'd never imagined owning. Duchess Helena appeared at random intervals, drilling her on names, titles, family connections, and social protocols until Alara's head spun. And Adrian remained distant, polite when necessary, coldly efficient the rest of the time. They shared meals in silence, met only when required by their schedule, and maintained the careful fiction that they were strangers, fulfilling a contract. But the cracks were showing. Friday's opera was a disaster waiting to happen from the moment they arrived. The Vale family box was prominent, visible to the entire theater. Alara sat beside Adrian in a gown of deep sapphire blue, her hands folded in her lap, her smile frozen in place. Relax, Adrian murmured. You look like you're facing execution. I feel like I am. Welcome to high society. It's all execution, just with better music. The performance began, some tragedy about doomed lovers that felt uncomfortably on the nose. Alara tried to focus on the stage, but she could feel eyes on them. Lorgnettes raised, whispers exchanged. Halfway through the second act, Adrian's hand found hers. Alara's breath caught. His fingers were warm, his grip firm but not possessive. It was a gesture meant to be seen, another piece of theater for the watching audience. But it didn't feel like theater. People are watching, he said quietly, his eyes still on the stage. Look at me. She turned. His face was inches from hers, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his storm-gray eyes. Smile, he whispered, like I've just told you something wonderful. Alara smiled, not the frozen mechanical smile she'd been wearing all week, but something real. Something that came from the absurdity of the moment, the strangeness of sitting in an opera box pretending to be in love with a man who told her in no uncertain terms not to actually fall for him. Adrian's expression shifted, surprise, then something darker, more complicated. That's better, he said, but he didn't let go of her hand. The opera ended. They stood to leave, and the crowd surged around them. Congratulations, questions, barely veiled curiosity disguised as courtesy. and then a voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Adrian, how delightful to find you here." Alara turned. The man approaching was tall, elegant, with the kind of practiced charm that immediately set her teeth on edge. Blonde hair, aristocratic features, expensive tailoring, and eyes that assessed her with the cold precision of a jeweler examining a stone for flaws. "Edmund," Adrian said flatly, "you're early." "I cut my trip short when I heard the extraordinary news. My dear cousin, engaged, and to such an intriguing young woman." Edmund's smile was all teeth. "You must be Miss Whitcomb. I've heard so much about you." "Nothing good, I hope," Alara said lightly. Edmund laughed. "Charming and witty. How refreshing." He turned to Adrian. "We must all dine together. Tomorrow night, perhaps? I'm simply dying to know how this romance began. It's all so sudden, you understand. One moment Adrian sworn off marriage entirely, and the next, he gestured elegantly toward Alara. Cupid's arrow strikes. Miraculous. Tomorrow's not convenient, Adrian said. Then the night after. Or the night after that. I'm very patient, cousin. Edmund's gaze locked on Alara. And very thorough. He bowed, kissed Alara's hand with exaggerated courtesy, and disappeared into the crowd. Adrian's jaw was tight enough to crack stone. That, he said quietly, was a warning shot. He doesn't believe us. No. And now he's going to do everything in his considerable power to prove it. They walked to their carriage in silence. The night air was cold, cutting through Alara's velvet cloak. She climbed inside and Adrian followed, his expression darker than she'd ever seen it. I need to know everything about you, he said abruptly. Every detail, every story, every piece of your history. If Edmund's going to investigate, he'll find things, and I need to know what he'll find before he uses it against us. Alara's stomach dropped. What do you want to know? Start with your father. How did he really lose his fortune? And there it was, the question she'd been dreading, the shame she'd buried beneath 3 years of survival. She took a breath. A shipping investment. 3 vessels bound for the East Indies. He'd borrowed heavily to finance it, mortgaged our home, cashed in every favor, convinced friends and relatives to invest alongside him. He was certain it would make us rich. And? Pirates off the coast of Madagascar. 2 ships sank. 1 was captured. Every pound lost. And because he'd acted as the primary investor, the debts fell on him. When he couldn't pay, the creditors came. They took everything, the house, the furniture, my mother's jewelry. Her voice cracked slightly. My father put a pistol in his mouth 3 months after the final judgment came through. Silence. Adrian's expression was unreadable in the darkness of the carriage. I'm sorry. Don't be. Pity doesn't change anything. No, he agreed. But context does. Edmund will find all of this. He'll use it to paint you as a fortune hunter, a desperate woman who saw an opportunity and seized it. Isn't that exactly what I am? Maybe, but that doesn't mean we let him wield it as a weapon. Adrian leaned forward, his eyes intense. Here's what we do. We control the narrative. Tomorrow you and I will visit Lady Rothschild. She's kind, influential, and terrible at keeping secrets. You'll tell her a carefully edited version of your family's tragedy. Emphasize your father's honor, your mother's illness, your own struggle. Make it sympathetic without being pathetic. By evening, half of London will know the story. And when Edmund tries to use it against you, it'll already be public knowledge. Neutered. Alara stared at him. You'd have me expose my family's shame deliberately? I'd have you weaponize it before Edmund does. There's a difference. Is there? In war, Miss Whitcomb, the first one to speak controls how the battle is framed. Edmund's planning an ambush. I'm suggesting we strike first. The carriage stopped in front of Thornbury House. Adrian stepped out, then turned to offer his hand. Alara hesitated, then took it. You're not just teaching me how to survive high society, she said quietly. You're teaching me how to fight it. I'm teaching you how to win, Adrian corrected. There's a difference. As they walked into the house together, Alara realized something that should have terrified her, but instead felt oddly exhilarating. She was no longer just playing a role. She was learning to become someone new, someone dangerous. Someone dangerous. The words echoed in Alara's mind as she stood before the mirror in her room that night, still wearing the sapphire gown from the opera. Mrs. Blackwood had offered to help her undress, but Alara had sent her away. She needed to be alone. needed to think. In the reflection, a stranger stared back. Not the invisible woman from the Ashford ball, not even the desperate daughter selling needlework to keep her family fed. This woman wore silk that cost more than a year's rent. This woman had sat in the Vale family box while London's elite watched and whispered. This woman had held the hand of a duke and smiled like she belonged. But beneath the expensive fabric and carefully applied cosmetics, Alara could still feel the truth clawing at her ribs. She was a fraud, an actress playing a role she barely understood. And now Adrian was asking her to do something that went far beyond simple performance. He was asking her to weaponize her family's tragedy before Edmund Carrington could use it to destroy them both. Strike first, control the narrative, turn shame into armor. The strategic brilliance of it made her sick. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in." Adrian entered without waiting for permission, still in his evening clothes, his cravat loosened and his expression unreadable. He closed the door behind him. Improper, scandalous, utterly in character for a man who seemed to view social conventions as suggestions rather than rules. "You're still awake," he observed. "I'm thinking." "About tomorrow, Lady Rothschild? About what I'm becoming." Alara turned from the mirror to face him. 3 weeks ago, I was invisible. Now I'm planning tactical strikes against people who want to expose me as a fortune hunter. It's happening so fast I can barely breathe. Adrian moved to the window, staring out at the darkened gardens. "You want to know the truth about survival in this world, Miss Whitcomb? It's not about breeding or money or even power. It's about adaptation. The ones who survive are the ones who can transform themselves faster than their enemies can destroy them." "Is that what you did? Transform yourself?" He was quiet for a long moment. "My father raised me to believe that showing weakness was a sin worse than failure. That trust was a liability. That love made you vulnerable." His shoulders tensed. He was right about the last part, at least. I watched him fall apart when the Duchess, before Helena, died in childbirth. He loved her so completely that losing her nearly killed him too. After that, he became something else, something harder. And he made sure I learned the same lesson. Alara's chest tightened. "Helena is your stepmother. She married my father when I was 12, a strategic alliance. She brought wealth and connections. He brought a title and legitimacy. They were honest about what it was. A partnership, not a romance. And in its own cold way, it worked. When he died 5 years ago, she stayed on as the Dowager Duchess. We have an understanding, which is why she's orchestrating this entire charade. She thinks I'm too damaged to marry for any reason except strategy. She's probably right." Adrian turned from the window, his eyes finding hers. "But that doesn't mean I'll let Edmund destroy what we've built. Tomorrow, we fight back. And I need to know you're ready." Alara lifted her chin. "I wouldn't be here if I wasn't." "Good." He moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. When we visit Lady Rothschild, she'll ask how we met, how I fell for you. We need a story, something believable." "What do you suggest?" Adrian's mouth curved into something that might have been a smile. "Tell her the truth. That you were standing alone at the Ashford ball, and I noticed you precisely because everyone else had stopped noticing. That I found your isolation more interesting than any of the desperate performances happening around us. That when we spoke, you didn't simper or flatter. You challenged me. And I realized I'd found someone who saw through the theater of it all." The words hung in the air between them, and Alara realized with a start that they weren't entirely fiction. That night at the opera, when he'd taken her hand, the way he'd defended her against Beatrice, the quiet moments of unexpected honesty. "That's actually quite good," she managed. "It's close enough to the truth to be convincing. The best lies always are." He opened the door. "Get some sleep, Miss Whitcomb. Tomorrow, we go to war." The door closed. Alara stood alone in the vast room, her heart pounding, and wondered when exactly the lines between performance and reality had started to blur. Lady Rothschild's townhouse was a confection of white stone and climbing roses, the kind of place where terrible things were discussed over tea and petite four. Alara arrived with Adrian mid-morning, wearing a day dress of soft green muslin that made her look young and vulnerable. A calculated choice, courtesy of the Duchess's strategic wardrobe planning. Their hostess was a round, cheerful woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a notorious appetite for gossip. She greeted them with genuine warmth, ushering them into a sitting room where sunlight streamed through tall windows. "Adrian, darling, and Miss Whitcomb, may I call you Alara? How wonderful that you've finally come to visit properly. I've been absolutely dying to hear the whole story. The opera was simply enchanting, seeing you two together, but I must know everything." She poured tea with the enthusiasm of someone settling in for a lengthy interrogation. "How did you meet? When did you know? Tell me it was romantic. Please tell me it was romantic." Adrian took his teacup with practiced ease. "Actually, Lady Rothschild, it was rather unconventional." "Even better." Alara set her own cup down carefully, her hands steady despite the anxiety coiling in her stomach. "We met at Lord Ashford's gathering. I suppose I was hiding." "Hiding?" Lady Rothschild leaned forward, delighted. "From what?" "From pity, mostly." Alara took a breath, feeling Adrian's gaze on her. "You may have heard about my family's difficulties. My father died 3 years ago after a disastrous investment. We lost everything. I've been living on the charity of distant relatives and whatever work I could find. Attending events like the Ashford Ball was torture. Being surrounded by people who once treated me as an equal and now looked through me as though I'd ceased to exist." Lady Rothschild's expression softened. "Oh, my dear. I had heard whispers, but I didn't realize it was quite so difficult." "It was," Alara said quietly. I was standing on the terrace that night trying to decide whether it was worse to stay and endure the whispers or leave and confirm everyone's opinion that I didn't belong anymore. And then Adrian found me." She looked at him. He was watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I was trying to escape the ballroom myself," Adrian said, his voice low. "Too many ambitious mothers, too many calculated conversations. And then I saw her, standing alone, looking like the only honest person in the entire house. Everyone else was performing. She was just present, real." "We spoke," Alara continued, surprised by how easily the words came. "He didn't treat me like someone to be pitied or dismissed. He was direct, challenging. He asked what I was reading, what I thought about the state of Parliament, whether I believed the Corn Laws were sustainable. Real questions, important questions. Not the trivial nonsense that usually passes for conversation at these gatherings." Lady Rothschild pressed her hand to her chest. "How wonderful." "It was unexpected," Adrian admitted. "I don't trust easily, Lady Rothschild, you know that. But Alara was different. She'd survived something that would have destroyed most people, and instead of becoming bitter, she'd become stronger, clearer. I found myself wanting to know more, to understand how someone could lose everything and still maintain such remarkable dignity." The words should have felt like manipulation. They were manipulation. But they also felt true in a way that made Alara's chest ache. "We began meeting," she said softly. "Quietly at first. Walks in Hyde Park. Conversations in bookshops. Adrian wanted to keep it private until he was certain, and I understood. I had no interest in becoming fodder for gossip mills. And then I realized I was certain," Adrian finished. "She's brilliant, resilient, and utterly unimpressed by the things that usually impress people. Why wouldn't I want to marry her?" Lady Rothschild was practically glowing. "This is the most romantic thing I've heard in years. A love born from genuine connection rather than social climbing or financial arrangement. Alara, my dear, you're a very lucky woman." "I know," Alara said, and meant it, even though the luck was temporary and the love was fiction. They stayed for another hour, fielding questions and spinning the narrative exactly as Adrian had planned. By the time they left, Lady Rothschild was already composing mental letters to every influential friend she had. In the carriage, Adrian leaned back against the seat, eyes closed. That was perfect. It felt like lying to a kind woman who deserved better. "Welcome to my world." He opened his eyes, fixing her with a steady gaze. "But you did exactly what needed to be done. By tomorrow, the entire ton will know your story. Edmund won't be able to use it against you because you've already controlled how it's told." "Does it ever bother you?" Alara asked. "The constant calculation, the strategic manipulation?" "Every day." The admission was quiet, startling in its honesty. But the alternative is worse. In this world, Miss Whitcomb, you either control the narrative or you become its victim. There's no middle ground. The carriage stopped at Thornbury House. They climbed out together, and Alara was halfway to the entrance when a footman approached Adrian with a sealed letter. "Just arrived, Your Grace. Marked urgent." Adrian broke the seal, scanned the contents. His face went white. "What is it?" Alara asked. He handed her the letter without a word. The handwriting was elegant, precise. The message was poison. "Dear cousin, how delightful to learn of your engagement through the rumor mill rather than a personal announcement. I've taken the liberty of making some inquiries about your charming Miss Whitcomb. Fascinating discoveries. Did you know her younger sister Margaret is currently being courted by a gentleman of questionable reputation? A Mr. Thomas Graves, recently returned from debtor's prison. Such unfortunate associations. One wonders what other secrets the Whitcomb family might be concealing. We really must have that dinner. I have so many questions." Your devoted cousin, Edmund Alara's blood turned to ice. "He's investigating Margaret." "He's threatening her," Adrian corrected, his voice deadly quiet. "Using her to get to you." "Who is Thomas Graves?" "A fortune hunter. Worse, a predator. He targets vulnerable young women from fallen families, courts them, compromises them, then demands payment from their families to restore their honor by marrying them." Adrian's jaw clenched. If Edmund's connecting Margaret to Graves, it means he's either manufactured the connection or discovered a real one. Either way, he's going to use it. Alara felt the world tilt. "I have to warn her. I have to. You have to think strategically." Adrian grabbed her arm, stopping her from rushing inside. "If you panic now, Edmund wins. He's trying to rattle you, make you desperate, force you into making a mistake that exposes our arrangement. My sister could be in danger. Then we protect her, but carefully, intelligently." He pulled her toward the house. "We need to find out if the connection to Graves is real or fabricated. We need to know what Edmund's planning, and we need to move faster than he expects." They burst into the entrance hall. Duchess Helena appeared at the top of the stairs, taking in their expressions with immediate understanding. "What's happened?" "Edmund's escalating," Adrian said, handing her the letter. "He's going after Alara's family." Helena read quickly, her face hardening. "Clever. Vicious, but clever. He's creating a scandal that will taint you by association, Alara. If your sister is linked to a known fortune hunter, society will assume the apple doesn't fall far from the tree." "Is it real?" Alara demanded. "Could Margaret actually be involved with this man?" "Only one way to find out." Helena moved to her desk, scribbled a note, sealed it. "I'm sending someone to your family's residence, discreetly. We'll have answers within hours." "Hours could be too late." "Panic is too late," Helena snapped. "Control is survival. Now sit down and let us handle this properly." Alara wanted to scream, wanted to run to Bloomsbury and drag Margaret to safety herself. But Adrian's hand found hers, a brief grounding touch. "Trust us," he said quietly. "Please." She sat. The hours that followed were agony. Helena's investigator returned with disturbing news. Margaret had indeed been seen with Thomas Graves. Multiple times. Walking in public gardens. Accepting small gifts. All within the past week. Just enough time for Edmund to have orchestrated the entire thing if he'd moved quickly. "He's setting a trap," Adrian said, pacing his study like a caged wolf. "If we confront Graves directly, Edmund will use it as evidence that we're trying to cover up a scandal. If we do nothing, the connection grows stronger until he can expose it publicly and destroy your credibility." "Then what do we do?" Alara asked, her voice barely steady. "We turn it around." Helena's eyes glittered with cold calculation. "Edmund thinks he's cornered you, but what if we expose him first? What if we reveal that he's been manipulating a young, vulnerable woman to destroy his cousin's engagement?" "You'd throw him to the wolves?" Alara asked. "I'd throw him to the hounds of hell if it protected this family," Helena said flatly. "The question is, are you willing to let me?" Alara thought of Margaret, sweet, gentle Margaret who'd never hurt anyone, who'd already suffered so much, who was now being used as a pawn in a game she didn't even know she was playing. "No," Alara said. Both Adrian and Helena turned to stare at her. "No?" Adrian repeated. "If we attack Edmund publicly, we're confirming that there's something to hide, that Margaret's somehow shameful or problematic." Alara stood, her mind racing. But what if we do something else? What if I confront Graves myself? Not as a victim trying to save her sister, as Adrian's fiancée asserting her authority. That's insane, Adrian said. Is it? Edmund expects me to either panic or hide. He's counting on me being weak, controllable. But what if I walk straight into his trap and turn it inside out? What if I publicly acknowledge that my sister has been receiving unwanted attention from a fortune hunter and I've taken steps to protect her? Make it about my strength, not her weakness. Helena's expression shifted. That's actually brilliant. It reframes the entire narrative. You're not covering up a scandal, you're defending your family from a predator. Society loves a protective older sister story. And it puts Edmund on the defensive, Adrian added slowly. If you handle it publicly, confidently, he can't use it as secret leverage anymore. It's already exposed, but on your terms, not his. Exactly. Alara's heart pounded. I'll need to move fast. Tomorrow, before Edmund can spin it his way. Where? Adrian asked. The Weston Garden Party. Everyone will be there, including Edmund, including Graves, probably. If Edmund's orchestrating this, he'll want his weapon close. Alara turned to face them both. I'll confront Graves in front of witnesses. Call him out for targeting vulnerable women. Make it clear that my sister has my protection and the protection of the Vale family. Turn his predatory behavior into the scandal, not Margaret's innocence. You'll be exposing yourself to enormous risk, Helena warned. If you stumble, if you show weakness, the entire plan collapses, and you'll have given Edmund exactly what he wants. Then I won't stumble. Adrian crossed the room in 3 strides, gripping her shoulders. This isn't a game, Alara. This is your reputation, your family's future. If you do this and it fails, if I do nothing and hide, Edmund wins anyway. She met his eyes. You told me the ones who survive are the ones who can transform faster than their enemies can destroy them. So let me transform. Let me fight. For a long moment, Adrian stared at her. Then, slowly something changed in his expression. The cold calculation melted away, replaced by something she'd never seen before. Genuine respect. Maybe even pride. All right, he said, but you don't do this alone. I'll be right beside you, and if it goes wrong, it won't. If it goes wrong, he repeated firmly, we face it together. You're my fiancé. That means you're under my protection. Edmund hurts you. He answers to me. The words should have felt like ownership. They didn't. They felt like partnership. Thank you, Alara whispered. Helena clapped her hands once. Then we have a plan. I'll ensure certain influential people are positioned to witness tomorrow's confrontation. Adrian, you'll provide visible support. Alara, you'll deliver the performance of your life. She smiled, sharp as broken glass. Let's show Edmund Carrington what happens when he underestimates a desperate woman. The Weston Garden Party sprawled across 3 acres of manicured lawns and sculpted hedges, hundreds of guests drifting through like expensive ghosts. Alara arrived on Adrian's arm wearing white lace and steel determination, her eyes scanning the crowd for 2 faces. She found them together. Edmund Carrington stood near the fountain, drink in hand, looking supremely pleased with himself. And beside him, laughing at something Edmund had said, was a man Alara recognized from the investigator's description, Thomas Graves. Handsome in a calculated way, charming smile, predator's eyes. There, she murmured to Adrian. His grip on her arm tightened. You're sure about this? Too late for doubt now. They crossed the lawn together. Conversations faltered as they approached. Duchess Helena had done her work well. The right people were positioned nearby, watching with barely concealed curiosity. Edmund saw them coming. His smile widened. Cousin, and the lovely Miss Whitcomb, what perfect timing. I was just introducing Mr. Graves to some of my associates. Thomas, may I present the Duke of Thornbury and his fiancée, Miss Alara Whitcomb. Graves bowed with practiced elegance. Your Grace, Miss Whitcomb. Charmed, Mr. Graves. Alara's voice cut through the pleasantries like a blade. I believe you've been spending time with my younger sister, Margaret Whitcomb. The crowd around them went silent. This was not how garden party conversations were supposed to unfold. Graves' smile flickered. I've had the pleasure of Miss Margaret's company on occasion, yes. A delightful young woman. Indeed. So delightful that you've been courting her without approaching her family for permission, giving her gifts, taking her on unchaperoned walks. Alara stepped forward, her voice carrying across the suddenly still garden. Tell me, Mr. Graves, do you make a habit of pursuing vulnerable young women from families in financial difficulty? Or is my sister a special case? Graves's face flushed red. Miss Whitcomb, I assure you my intentions are entirely honorable. Your intentions, Alara interrupted, are documented. I've made inquiries, Mr. Graves. Your pattern is well established. You target women whose families can't afford scandal. You compromise them. Then you offer marriage in exchange for payment, restoration of honor at a price. It's extortion dressed up as courtship. Edmund's smile had frozen. Alara, these are serious accusations. They're facts, Adrian cut in, his voice cold as winter. We have testimony from 3 previous families Mr. Graves has targeted. He operates within the letter of the law while violating its spirit entirely. And now he's set his sights on my fiancée's sister. The crowd pressed closer. This was scandal, drama, the kind of spectacle that would dominate conversation for weeks. Graves took a step back. I don't have to listen to this. You do if you want to continue moving in society, Alara said, because I'm making this very clear, very public. Margaret Whitcomb is under the protection of the Vale family now. Any further contact with her will be considered an assault on the Thornbury Duchy. Any attempts to manipulate or compromise her will be met with legal action and social exile. She turned to face the watching crowd. I'm not ashamed that my family has faced difficulties. I'm not hiding from the fact that we've struggled, but I will not allow predators to exploit that vulnerability. Not my sister, not anyone's sister. Silence. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, someone began to clap. Others joined. Within moments, the garden erupted in applause. Graves looked around wildly, his face white with rage and humiliation. You can't. This is over, Adrian said quietly. Leave. Now. And if I hear you've approached Miss Margaret again, the consequences will be far worse than social embarrassment. Graves fled. Edmund stood frozen, his carefully constructed trap dismantled in front of dozens of witnesses. This is highly irregular, he managed. So is using an innocent girl as a weapon against your cousin, Alara said, meeting his eyes. Did you really think I wouldn't fight back? I think, Edmund said slowly, his voice dropping to a whisper only she and Adrian could hear, that you just made this far more interesting than I anticipated. Well played, Miss Whitcomb, but the game's not over. No, Alara agreed. It's not. Edmund walked away, his shoulders stiff with barely suppressed fury. The crowd swarmed around them. Congratulations, support, questions. Lady Rothschild appeared, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. My dear girl, that was the bravest thing I've ever witnessed. Protecting your sister so publicly, so beautifully. She's family, Alara said simply. I'd do anything to protect her. Adrian's hand found the small of her back, a gesture of support that felt increasingly real. We should go, he murmured. You've won the moment. Don't let anyone dilute it. They made their excuses and retreated to the carriage. The moment the door closed, Alara's legs gave out. She collapsed against the seat, shaking. She couldn't finish. Extraordinary, Adrian supplied. Terrifying. Brilliant. He sat beside her, closer than propriety allowed. You just turned Edmund's attack into your triumph. The entire town is talking about your courage, not your family's scandal. But I made an enemy, a powerful one. You already had an enemy. Now he knows you're not afraid of him. Alara laughed shakily. I was petrified. I know. I could see it in your hands. They were shaking when you stepped forward. Adrian's voice softened. But you did it anyway. That's what courage actually is, being terrified and doing it regardless. She turned to look at him. They were close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his eyes, close enough to feel the warmth of him in the confined space. Thank you, she whispered, for standing with me. We're partners in this deception, remember? Your battles are mine. Are they? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Or are you just protecting your investment? Adrian's expression shifted, something raw and complicated crossing his features. I don't know anymore. The honesty of it stole her breath. 3 months, she said quietly. That's what we agreed to. 3 months of performance, then we both walk away. Yes, but it doesn't feel like performance anymore, does it? Adrian didn't answer. Instead, he did something that shattered every careful rule they'd established. He leaned forward and kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't careful. It was desperate and furious and absolutely real. A collision of 3 weeks of tension and proximity and unwanted feelings that neither of them had been brave enough to acknowledge. Alara kissed him back. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian's eyes were dark with something that looked like panic. That was, he started. A mistake, Alara finished, even though every nerve in her body was screaming the opposite. Yes, a mistake. We can't, this isn't, I know. But neither of them moved away. The carriage stopped at Thornbury House. They climbed out in silence, maintaining careful distance, both pretending that everything hadn't just shifted irrevocably. They were halfway across the entrance hall when Duchess Helena appeared, her face ashen. Adrian, she said, we have a problem. What now? Helena handed him a newspaper, late edition, still smelling of ink. Edmund moved faster than we anticipated. Adrian scanned the headline. His face went white. He handed the paper to Alara without a word. The headline screamed across the page in bold type. Veil engagement exposed as fraud. Duke's fiancée, allegedly paid to deceive society. Anonymous source claims 3-month charade. Below it, the article laid out everything. The arrangement, the payment, the calculated deception. Not proof, Edmund was too clever for that, but enough detail, enough insider knowledge that the questions it raised would be devastating. Someone had talked, someone had betrayed them, and their entire world was about to collapse. Alara read the article 3 times, each pass making the words feel more real, more devastating. The journalist, identified only as a source close to the family, had detailed everything. The financial arrangement, the 3-month timeline, even the specific amount, £50,000. Whoever had leaked this hadn't just gossiped. They'd provided documentation-level detail. Who knew? Adrian's voice was deadly quiet. Who had access to this information? Helena's face was carved from stone. Very few people. You, me, Alara, my personal secretary. But she's been with the family for 20 years, utterly loyal. The bank manager who handled the initial transfer, but he's bound by confidentiality agreements that would destroy him if broken. Then someone broke into your study, Adrian said. Read your correspondence, found proof. Or, Alara said slowly, her mind racing, Edmund didn't need proof. He just needed enough detail to sound credible. Think about it. The article doesn't actually provide evidence. It's all allegedly, and sources claim. He's counting on the scandal being sensational enough that people won't demand verification before condemning us. Adrian's eyes narrowed. You think he's bluffing? I think he's gambling. He investigated me, found out about the arrangement somehow. Maybe through servants' gossip, maybe through financial irregularities he noticed. And now he's releasing just enough information to start a firestorm, hoping we'll panic and either confirm it by our reaction or crumble under the pressure. Helena moved to the window, staring out at the street where carriages were already slowing, passengers craning their necks toward Thornbury House. Whether it's proof or bluff hardly matters now. The accusation is public. By tomorrow morning, every drawing room in London will be dissecting this. We'll be crucified. Not if we move first, Alara said. Both Adrian and Helena turned to stare at her. Move how? Adrian demanded. The story's already out. We can't retract it. We can't deny it without looking defensive. And we certainly can't confirm it. No, Alara agreed, her heart pounding so hard she could barely hear her own voice over it. But we can change what it means. Explain, Helena said sharply. Alara set the newspaper down with hands that had stopped shaking. Strange. She'd been trembling through the entire garden party confrontation, but now, facing total destruction, she felt oddly calm. Clear. Edmund's gambling that society will be outraged by the deception. That the idea of a paid engagement will scandalize everyone so thoroughly that we'll be ruined. But what if we reframe it? You can't reframe fraud, Adrian said flatly. Can't you? Alara turned to face him. What if this wasn't fraud? What if it was something else entirely? Something strategic? Brilliant, even. Helena's eyes sharpened. Go on. Society expects marriages to be about love or money or political alliance, but they're also obsessed with intelligence, strategy, outmaneuvering one's rivals. Alara began pacing, her thoughts crystallizing. What if we admit it publicly, not as a shameful secret that's been exposed, but as a calculated move that worked exactly as intended? That's insane, Adrian said. Is it? Think about what we've accomplished in 3 weeks. We silenced the gossips questioning your bachelorhood. We proved I could hold my own in high society despite my family's fall from grace. We outmaneuvered Edmund at every turn. We demonstrated that a partnership based on mutual respect and strategic thinking can be more powerful than some vapid romance. She stopped in front of Adrian. What if we tell the truth that yes, this started as a business arrangement, but it became something real? That we fell in love not despite the calculation, but because of it? Because we respected each other's minds enough to become partners? Silence. Then Helena laughed, a short, sharp sound of genuine surprise. That's either the most brilliant thing I've ever heard or the most suicidal. It's both, Adrian said, but his eyes were locked on Alara with an intensity that made her breath catch. You want us to weaponize honesty, admit the arrangement, but claim it transformed into something genuine. Exactly. We control the narrative, make them see it as a modern love story. Two intelligent people who started with pragmatism and discovered passion. Alara's voice gained strength. Edmund thinks he's exposing a scandal. We'll turn it into a romance for the ages. The impoverished woman and the cynical duke who made a cold bargain and found something neither of them expected. And the fact that you were paid? Helena challenged. A pragmatic detail. I was desperate. He needed a solution. We were honest about what we each brought to the table. Isn't that more honorable than the hundreds of society marriages built on lies and hidden resentment? Alara turned to Helena. You said it yourself. Your marriage to the late Duke was a strategic alliance. Did that make it shameful? No, Helena admitted slowly. But we never pretended otherwise. Then we won't either. We'll own it. Stand in front of society and say, yes, this is who we are. Yes, we made an arrangement. And yes, it worked so well that we couldn't help falling in love in the process. Adrian's jaw was tight. You realize what you're asking? We'd have to sell this completely. No cracks. No hesitation. One moment of doubt and the entire house of cards collapses. I know. We'd have to convince everyone, including my cousin, including people who are actively looking for proof we're lying, that we're genuinely in love. That the arrangement was just the beginning, not the entire story. I understand. And we'd have to... Adrian's voice dropped. We'd have to make it believable. Live it. Act like a couple who chose each other, not two people bound by a contract. Alara met his eyes. Remembered the kiss in the carriage? The way her heart had stopped when his lips found hers. The terrifying truth that somewhere in the past 3 weeks, the performance had become dangerously real. Yes, she said quietly. We would. For a long moment, the three of them stood frozen in the entrance hall, London gathering outside like storm clouds, the weight of an impossible gamble pressing down on them. Then Adrian straightened his shoulders. When? Tomorrow, Helena said decisively. There's a parliamentary reception. Half of London's elite will be there, including Edmund. We make a statement. Public, unambiguous, and utterly confident. And if it fails? Adrian asked. Then we fail spectacularly, Alara said, but at least we'll fail on our own terms. Adrian's mouth curved into something that might have been respect, or might have been the beginning of genuine affection. You're either the bravest woman I've ever met, or the most reckless. Can I be both? Apparently you are. He turned to Helena. Draft the statement. Make it perfect. We'll have one chance to make this work. Helena nodded. I'll need a few hours. Then we'd better prepare. Adrian looked at Alara and something shifted in his expression, calculation giving way to something raw, more honest. You and I need to talk. Privately. They retreated to his study, the door closing behind them with a soft click that felt like a seal being broken. Adrian moved to the sideboard, poured 2 glasses of whiskey, handed her one without asking if she wanted it. "Drink," he said. Alara drank. The liquor burned, but it steadied her. Adrian set his own glass down, then turned to face her fully. "If we're going to do this, if we're going to stand in front of everyone and claim we fell in love, we need to be honest with each other first. No performance, no calculation, just truth. All right? Did you mean it? What you said in the carriage, that this doesn't feel like performance anymore?" Alara's throat tightened. "Yes." "When did it change for you?" "I don't know. Maybe when you defended me against Beatrice. Maybe when you helped me protect Margaret. Maybe—" She took a breath. "Maybe when I realized that beneath all your coldness, you're just as terrified of being hurt as I am. Just as desperate to survive in a world that's been brutal to both of us." Adrian's expression cracked, just slightly, just enough. "You terrify me," he said quietly. "When you walked into that garden party and confronted Graves, I watched you transform into someone formidable. Someone who wouldn't just survive this world, but conquer it. And I realized I didn't want this to end in 3 months. I didn't want you to take your 50,000 pounds and disappear." "What do you want?" "I want what I told Lady Rothschild. I want a partner, someone who sees through the theater, someone who challenges me and infuriates me and makes me feel less alone." He stepped closer. "I want you, Alara. Not as a temporary arrangement, as something real." The words hung between them like a bridge over a chasm. "If we do this," Alara said carefully, "if we make this real, it changes everything. The terms, the timeline, the ending. I know. And if it fails, if society destroys us anyway, then we'll be destroyed together, which is still better than being destroyed alone." Alara set her glass down with shaking hands. "I'm afraid." "So am I." Adrian's hand found hers, his fingers warm and sure. "But I'm more afraid of letting you go." She looked up at him. This man who'd been a stranger a month ago, who'd become an ally, a partner, and now something infinitely more dangerous and necessary. "Then let's make them believe it. Let's make it so real that even we can't tell where the performance ends and the truth begins. And after, when the scandal dies down, we'll figure it out, together." Adrian pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. "You're certain? Because once we do this, there's no going back. We'll either win everything or lose it all." "I've already lost everything once," Alara whispered. "I survived, and I'm stronger now. We both are." He kissed her again, slower this time, deliberate, a promise instead of a question. And Alara kissed him back with the full knowledge that she was choosing this. Not because she had to, not because of money or survival or strategic necessity, but because somewhere in the calculated deception, she'd fallen genuinely, terrifyingly in love with Adrian Vale. When they finally broke apart, Adrian's eyes were bright with something that looked like hope. "Tomorrow, then. We fight for this. For us." "For us," Alara agreed. The parliamentary reception glittered with power and menace in equal measure. The grand hall was packed with lords, ladies, politicians, and predators, everyone who mattered in London society, all gathered under crystal chandeliers to witness whatever would happen next. Alara descended the main staircase on Adrian's arm, wearing a gown of deep crimson silk that Helena had chosen specifically for its boldness. No more soft pastels, no more demure whites. This was war paint. The crowd fell silent as they appeared. Edmund stood near the center of the room, surrounded by a cluster of supporters who looked like they'd come to watch an execution. When he saw them, his smile was pure triumph. "Cousin," he called out, his voice carrying across the suddenly still hall. "How brave of you to appear. I wasn't certain you'd have the courage, given this morning's revelations." Adrian's grip on Alara's arm tightened fractionally, but his voice was calm. "Revelations? You mean the speculative gossip column that's been making the rounds? I'm surprised you give it such credence, Edmund. I'd have thought you had better taste." "Gossip?" Edmund's eyebrows rose. "With such specific details? Such intimate knowledge of your private arrangements? Come now, Adrian, surely you're not going to pretend there's no truth to it." The crowd pressed closer, scenting blood. Adrian and Alara reached the center of the hall. For a moment, they stood surrounded by watching faces, some sympathetic, most simply curious about how they'd defend themselves. Then Adrian did something unexpected. He smiled. "No," he said clearly. "I'm not going to pretend." A ripple of shock went through the crowd. Edmund's smile widened. "Then you admit—" "I admit," Adrian interrupted, his voice cutting through the noise, "that my engagement to Miss Whitcomb began as a practical arrangement. My mother suggested it. I agreed to it. Elara needed financial security, and I needed to silence the vultures who seem to believe a man's worth is measured solely by his marital status." The hall erupted in whispers. This was confession, scandal, social suicide. "But here's what your source failed to mention, Edmund." Adrian turned to face the crowd fully, his hand still firmly holding Elara's. "The arrangement worked, better than either of us expected, because in the process of pretending to care for each other, we discovered something remarkable. We actually did. We do." Elara stepped forward, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. "My family lost everything 3 years ago. I've spent every day since fighting to survive in a world that stopped seeing me the moment I lost my money. When the Duchess offered me a way to save my family, I took it. I'm not ashamed of that. I'm grateful for it, because it brought me to Adrian. We started with pragmatism," Adrian continued. "We were honest about what we each needed, what we could offer, what we expected. And in that honesty, we found something most society marriages never have: genuine respect, intellectual partnership, trust." "You paid her?" someone shouted from the crowd. "Yes," Elara said clearly. "He did, and I accepted, because I was desperate and he was honest, and neither of us saw the point in pretending our circumstances were anything other than what they were. But money didn't buy affection. It bought time. Time for us to discover that beneath the arrangement, we were suited in ways that had nothing to do with contracts or pounds." Adrian turned to face her, and the look in his eyes made Elara's breath stop. This was performance, yes, but it was also truth, and everyone watching could feel the difference. "I've spent my entire life being told that marriage is a trap," Adrian said, his voice dropping but somehow still carrying across the silent hall. "That love makes you weak. That the smart choice is isolation, control, never giving anyone the power to hurt you. And then I met Elara. She was standing alone at a ball, invisible to everyone except me. And when we spoke, she didn't flatter or manipulate or perform. She was just honest, real. And I thought, if this is what an arranged partnership feels like, what might genuine connection be?" Elara felt tears prick her eyes, not from calculation, but from the raw truth in his words. "You asked me once if I was brave or desperate," she said. "The truth is, I was both. I still am. Brave enough to accept an unusual arrangement, desperate enough to see it through. And now," her voice caught, "now I'm terrified, because this stopped being an arrangement weeks ago, and I don't know how to protect myself from something real." "Then don't," Adrian said softly. "Don't protect yourself. Don't hide. Just be here. With me. However complicated, however unconventional, however scandalous everyone thinks it is." He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Elara hadn't known he was carrying it, hadn't planned this part. Inside was a ring. Not the showy diamond she'd worn for appearances, but something different. A sapphire surrounded by smaller diamonds, elegant and understated and absolutely genuine. "Elara Whitcomb," Adrian said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "our arrangement expires in 6 weeks, but I'm asking for something different now. Not a contract, not a performance, a real engagement, a real marriage, a real partnership. Will you, knowing everything you know about me, about my family, about the world we live in, will you choose this anyway?" The hall held its breath. Elara looked at the ring, at Adrian's face, at the crowd of people who'd dismissed her, pitied her, erased her for 3 years, at Edmund, whose expression had shifted from triumph to uncertainty. She thought about survival, about dignity, about the difference between being desperate and being strategic, about how sometimes the bravest thing you could do was choose truth when lies would be easier. "Yes," she said clearly, "I choose this. I choose you. Not because of money or status or convenience, Because you're the only person in 3 years who's seen me, really seen me, and decided I was worth fighting for. Adrian slid the ring onto her finger, and the sapphire caught the light like a promise. Then he kissed her in front of everyone, and the kiss was so obviously real, so charged with genuine feeling, that even the most cynical observers couldn't deny it. The silence held for 3 heartbeats. Then someone began to clap. Lady Rothschild, tears streaming down her face, applauding like she was watching the final act of a triumphant play. Others joined, slowly at first, then building like a wave. Within moments, half the hall was applauding. Not everyone. Edmund stood frozen, his face white with impotent rage. Beatrice Cunningham looked like she'd swallowed poison. Several others whispered skeptically, clearly unconvinced. But enough people were applauding. Enough were smiling. Enough were choosing to believe in the story of 2 intelligent people who'd made an unusual bargain and found unexpected love. Duchess Helena appeared at their side, her expression carefully neutral but her eyes bright with something that might have been approval. "Well," she murmured, "that was either the most magnificent performance I've ever witnessed or the most authentic public declaration in London history. I honestly can't tell which." "Neither can we," Elara admitted. Adrian's arm wrapped around her waist, solid and grounding. "Does it matter?" "Not even slightly," Helena said. "You've won the room. That's all that matters for now." Edmund pushed through the crowd, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. "This isn't over," he hissed at Adrian. "You think a pretty speech and a romantic gesture erase the deception? You're still lying to everyone." "No," Adrian said quietly. "We're telling the truth. Finally. Completely. What we did was unconventional, but it wasn't dishonorable. And if you try to paint it otherwise, Edmund, you're not attacking a fraud. You're attacking a genuine love story. Good luck making that into a scandal." Edmund's jaw worked silently. Then he turned on his heel and stormed out, his supporters trailing behind like confused ducklings. The crowd surged forward. Questions, congratulations, barely veiled curiosity. Adrian fielded them with practiced ease while Elara stood beside him, the sapphire ring heavy on her finger, her heart pounding with the magnitude of what they'd just done. They'd admitted everything, risked everything, and somehow, impossibly, they'd won. Hours later, back at Thornbury House, Elara finally allowed herself to collapse into a chair in the sitting room. Her feet ached, her face hurt from smiling. Every muscle in her body felt like it had been wound too tight for too long. Adrian appeared with 2 glasses of wine, handing her one before settling into the chair across from hers. "We did it," he said. "We survived it," Elara corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Adrian's mouth curved into a rare, genuine smile. Edmund's retreated. Society's bought the story, or at least enough of them have that the scandal's been neutered. You're officially my fiancée, not my paid actress. My actual fiancée. With a very real sapphire to prove it. You noticed. It's hard to miss. Elara looked at the ring, then at Adrian. "When did you get this?" "This morning. While you and my mother were plotting, I realized something." He set his wine down, leaning forward. "If we were going to ask people to believe in our love, it needed to be real. Not performance, not calculation, real. So I found a ring that felt like you, beautiful, unusual, stronger than it looks." Elara's throat tightened. "Adrian, I meant what I said tonight. Every word. The arrangement was practical, yes, but it stopped being just practical the moment you confronted Beatrice at that first ball. When you protected your sister at the garden party. When you kissed me back in the carriage like you meant it." "I did mean it." "I know." His voice dropped. "That's what terrifies me, because I don't know how to do this. I've spent my entire life avoiding exactly this kind of vulnerability, and now I'm choosing it, asking for it, with you." Elara set her wine aside and moved to kneel before his chair, taking his hands. "Then we'll figure it out together. That's what partnerships are, aren't they? 2 people who don't have all the answers but are willing to search for them side by side." Adrian pulled her up onto his lap, holding her close enough that she could feel his heartbeat, rapid, nervous, utterly human. "The contract expires in 6 weeks. I know. I'm proposing we tear it up, right now, replace it with something else." "What?" "A real engagement, a real wedding. A real marriage with no timeline, no exit clause, no safety net. Just us, choosing each other every day for as long as we both shall live. Alara pulled back to look at him. That's terrifying. Completely. And there's no guarantee it'll work. None whatsoever. We might fail spectacularly. Almost certainly will, at some point. Adrian's smile was crooked, vulnerable, absolutely genuine. But I'd rather fail with you than succeed alone, because you've shown me something I didn't think existed. That being seen, truly seen by another person, isn't weakness, it's strength. Alara kissed him, softly this time, deliberately, sealing a promise that had nothing to do with money or society or strategic positioning. Just two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of their respective prisons and decided to build something new. When they finally broke apart, Helena stood in the doorway, holding a document. The original contract, she said, moving into the room. Shall I file it away? Or would you prefer to do something more symbolic? Adrian took it, scanned the pages, all the careful terms, the payment schedules, the exit clauses. 3 months of calculated deception reduced to legal language. He handed it to Alara. Your call. She looked at the papers that had once represented her salvation, her family's security, her escape from poverty and invisibility. Then she walked to the fireplace and threw them in. The flames caught immediately, consuming 3 months of lies in less than a minute. There, Alara said, watching the papers blacken and curl. No more arrangement, no more performance, just truth. Helena's smile was small but genuine. I underestimated you both. I thought I was orchestrating a strategic deception. Turns out I was engineering something far more dangerous. What's that? Adrian asked. An actual love match. Helena shook her head. Revolutionary, terrifying, and possibly the best thing that's ever happened to this family. She moved to the door, pausing at the threshold. I'll draw up a proper marriage settlement, something equitable, something that reflects genuine partnership rather than financial transaction. Thank you, Alara said, for everything, even the manipulation. Especially the manipulation. It worked, didn't it? Helena's eyes glittered. Besides, every great love story needs a cunning matchmaker. I'm simply claiming my role in yours. She left them alone. Adrian and Alara stood before the fire, watching the last traces of their contract turn to ash, and let themselves simply be. Two people who'd started as strangers, become allies, and somehow transformed into something neither of them had known they needed. So, Adrian said eventually, what happens now? Alara leaned against him, feeling his arm wrap around her shoulders. Now, we plan a real wedding, face down Edmund's next attempt to destroy us, because you know he's not done. Oh, I'm counting on it. And we figure out how to actually be in love, without scripts, without strategies, just honesty. The most terrifying prospect of all, Adrian agreed, but he was smiling. Outside, London spread beneath them, the city that had erased her, challenged him, tested them both. But inside Thornbury House, in the warm glow of firelight, Alara felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years. Safety. Partnership. Home. Not because of money or status or strategic maneuvering, but because she'd taken the most dangerous gamble of her life, choosing truth over fear, love over survival, and a future without guarantees over a present defined by careful calculation. And somehow, impossibly, she'd won. The game wasn't over. Edmund would regroup, society would whisper, challenges would come, but she wouldn't face them alone. Never again. Never again. The words became Alara's morning prayer, her evening meditation, her constant reminder as the weeks unfolded. The parliamentary reception had been a battle won, but Edmund Carrington was not a man who accepted defeat gracefully. If anything, their public declaration had transformed his campaign from subtle manipulation into open warfare. The attacks came swiftly and from multiple directions. 3 days after the reception, an anonymous pamphlet circulated through London's clubs and drawing rooms, detailing the Whitcomb family's financial collapse with vicious precision. Every debt, every creditor, every humiliating detail of their fall from grace, presented as evidence that Alara was nothing more than a calculated social climber who'd entrapped a naive duke. A week later, rumors surfaced that Adrian's business investments were failing, that the Vale fortune was secretly in jeopardy, that the engagement was actually a desperate attempt to secure capital through Alara's non-existent hidden wealth. Then came the Whisper campaign targeting Duchess Helena, suggesting she'd orchestrated the entire affair to maintain control over her stepson, that she was manipulating them both for her own political ends. Each attack was carefully constructed, impossible to trace directly to Edmund, but bearing his fingerprints nonetheless. Alara stood in the drawing room one gray morning reading the latest scandal sheet and felt rage replace fear. She'd spent 3 years being invisible, being dismissed, being ground down by a world that saw her as worthless. She'd clawed her way back through an impossible bargain, survived public scrutiny, and transformed a calculated deception into something genuine and powerful. She was done being anyone's victim. "We need to end this," she said to Adrian, who sat at his desk surrounded by correspondence. "Not defend against it, not weather it, end it permanently." Adrian looked up, his expression weary. The constant attacks had taken their toll, dark circles under his eyes, tension in his shoulders that never quite released. "I'm open to suggestions. Short of challenging Edmund to a duel, which is both illegal and unlikely to improve our social standing. What if we did something better than a duel?" Alara set the scandal sheet down and moved to stand before his desk. "What if we destroyed his credibility so completely that anything he says about us becomes automatically suspect?" "How?" "By exposing what he's really after. The inheritance, the title, everything he'll gain if you die without an heir." Alara's mind raced, pieces clicking together. Edmund's entire campaign relies on appearing concerned and righteous, a worried cousin trying to protect the Vale family from a fraudulent marriage. But what if we prove that his concern is actually pure self-interest? That he's been systematically attempting to discredit you to position himself as the better heir? Adrian leaned back, eyes narrowing with interest. "You want to turn his own strategy against him." Exactly. He's been gathering evidence against us. What if we've been gathering evidence against him? Have we? Not yet, but we can. Alara pulled a chair close, leaning forward. "Think about it. Edmund's been extraordinarily well informed about our private affairs. The contract details, the payment schedule, my family's financial history. That information had to come from somewhere. Someone's been feeding it to him. You think there's a spy in this household? I think there's a weak link. Someone Edmund bribed or blackmailed, and if we find them, we find proof of his methods. Proof that he's been actively working to sabotage your engagement through deception and manipulation. That changes the narrative entirely, from concerned cousin to ambitious schemer." Adrian's expression shifted from exhaustion to something sharper, more predatory. "The servants. He would have targeted someone with access but limited loyalty, someone new, or someone with debts, or someone who resents the family," Alara added. "Helena mentioned her personal secretary has been with you for 20 years. But what about the newer staff? The footmen, the maids, the drivers?" Adrian stood abruptly, moving to pull a bell cord. "I'm calling my steward. If there's a leak, he'll help us find it, discreetly." Within an hour, they had a list. 7 servants hired within the past 18 months, 3 with known financial difficulties. 1. A junior footman named Thomas Birch, who'd been seen speaking with Edmund's valet on multiple occasions. "That's our target," Adrian said, studying the name. "But we need to be careful. If we confront him directly and we're wrong, we tip our hand. If we're right but he warns Edmund, we lose our advantage." "Then we don't confront him," Alara said. "We test him. Give him false information, something specific, something Edmund would immediately act on if he received it. And when Edmund makes his move, we'll know for certain." Helena appeared in the doorway, drawn by their intense conversation. "What are you two plotting?" They explained quickly. Helena listened with growing approval, her expression sharpening into something that reminded Alara why this woman had survived decades in London's most cutthroat social circles. "Brilliant," Helena said. "What false information did you have in mind?" Alara smiled, the plan crystallizing fully. "We let Thomas overhear a conversation, Adrian and I arguing, something about how I've been secretly corresponding with my former suitor, a completely fictional man who supposedly wants me to break the engagement. We make it sound scandalous, devastating, like our relationship is fracturing." Edmund would pounce on that, Adrian said. He'd expose it publicly, probably at the Haverford Anniversary Gala this weekend. Every important family in London will be there. Exactly. And when he makes his accusation, claiming to have proof of my infidelity, my secret correspondence, we reveal that there is no suitor. Never was. The entire thing was bait. Alara's voice hardened. And we demand to know how he obtained such detailed, specific information about a private conversation in the Duke of Thornbury's home. Information that could only have come from someone he planted or bribed. It puts him on the defensive, Helena observed. Forces him to either admit to espionage or look like a paranoid liar making wild accusations. Either way, his credibility is destroyed, Adrian finished. No one will trust another word he says about us. They spent the rest of the day crafting the perfect false conversation, intimate enough to seem real, scandalous enough to be irresistible bait. That evening, they performed it in the library, speaking just loudly enough to be overheard by Thomas Birch, who was supposedly polishing silver in the adjacent hallway. I can't do this anymore, Alara said, her voice strained with manufactured anguish. It's not fair to you, Adrian, not when my heart is still… She broke off dramatically. Still what? Adrian's voice was cold, perfectly pitched. Say it, Alara. Finish the sentence. Still conflicted. Charles, he's been writing to me. The man I knew before my father died, he's returned to London and he wants… Another strategic pause. He wants me to reconsider. Reconsider our engagement? I don't know what I want anymore. Alara allowed tears to enter her voice, not difficult given the stress of the past weeks. I thought I could move forward, but seeing his letters, remembering what we had, where are these letters? Hidden, in my room, behind the loose panel in the wardrobe. I couldn't bear to destroy them. Adrian's footsteps, heavy, angry. This changes everything. I know, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. A door slammed. Perfect. They waited in silence for 30 seconds. Then Alara moved quietly to the library door and peered out. Thomas Birch was gone, his silver polishing abandoned half-finished on the hallway table. He took the bait, she whispered. Adrian joined her at the door, his hand finding hers. Now we wait for Edmund to make his move. The Haverford Anniversary Gala was London society at its most resplendent and ruthless. 500 guests, 3 ballrooms, enough champagne to float a small ship, and an undercurrent of barely suppressed anticipation. Word had spread, somehow, mysteriously, that something significant was going to happen tonight. The Duke of Thornbury and his controversial fiancée would be in attendance, and Edmund Carrington had been seen arriving early, his expression grimly triumphant. Alara descended the grand staircase on Adrian's arm, wearing a gown of midnight blue silk that made her look like a queen preparing for battle. The sapphire engagement ring caught the chandelier light, a constant reminder that this was no longer performance. It was protection of something real. They moved through the crowd, accepting greetings and deflecting questions with practiced ease. Alara could feel Edmund watching them from across the ballroom, could see the predatory satisfaction in his eyes. He thought he'd won, thought he had the weapon that would finally destroy them. Let him think it. An hour into the evening, Edmund made his move. He climbed onto the small dais where the orchestra had just finished a waltz, calling for attention with the kind of commanding presence that silenced even the most determined gossipers. Lords and ladies, he began, his voice carrying across the suddenly still ballroom. Forgive this interruption, but I'm afraid I can no longer stand by in silence while a terrible deception is perpetrated against my family. The crowd pressed closer, scenting scandal. Adrian's hand tightened on Alara's arm, but his expression remained perfectly neutral. Here we go, he murmured. Edmund continued, his voice heavy with false regret. My cousin Adrian and his fiancée have presented themselves as a love match, a modern romance born from honest partnership. But I've recently learned information that shatters that illusion completely. Get to the point, Edmund, Adrian called out, his voice cold. The point, cousin, is that Miss Whitcomb has been conducting a secret correspondence with another man, a former suitor, a man named Charles whom she knew before her family's fall from grace. Edmund pulled papers from his coat pocket, forgeries, Alara realized, manufactured to support his accusation. She keeps his letters hidden in her wardrobe behind a loose panel. She told you herself, just 3 nights ago, that her heart remains conflicted. that she doesn't know what she wants. Gasps rippled through the crowd. This was better than theater. It was real scandal, unfolding in real time. Alara felt every eye turn toward her, felt the weight of judgment, suspicion, the hungry anticipation of watching her fall. She stepped forward, her voice clear and steady. "That's a fascinating accusation, Lord Carrington. Tell me, how exactly did you come by this information? These specific details about a private conversation in the Duke of Thornbury's home?" Edmund's smile didn't waver. "I have sources who are concerned about the Vale family's welfare." "Sources," Alara interrupted, her voice sharp as glass. "Or spies. Because there's a significant difference between legitimate concern and deliberate espionage." "I don't know what you're implying. I'm implying that you've been bribing or blackmailing members of my fiancé's household staff to gather information you could weaponize. Information like this completely fictional conversation about a completely fictional suitor named Charles." She turned to face the crowd. "There is no Charles. There never was. The conversation Lord Carrington just described was staged specifically to identify which member of our household was selling information to him." The crowd's murmur shifted in tone, confusion replacing certainty. Edmund's face flushed. "That's absurd. You're lying to cover your infidelity." "Am I?" Alara's voice cut through his protest. "Then by all means produce these letters. Show everyone the evidence of my secret correspondence." Edmund held up the papers. "I have them right here." "No," Adrian said quietly, moving to stand beside Alara. "You have forgeries. Papers you created or commissioned based on information from your spy. But there are no real letters, because there is no Charles. We invented him to flush out the leak in our household." He gestured to the edge of the ballroom, where two men stood holding a third between them, Thomas Birch, the footman, looking terrified. "Mr. Birch has been very forthcoming," Adrian continued, his voice carrying across the silent hall. "He's provided detailed testimony about how Lord Carrington approached him 6 weeks ago. How he was offered money, significant money, to report on conversations, movements, any information that might be useful. How he's been feeding Edmund intelligence about our private lives in exchange for coins." Helena appeared beside them, holding a leather portfolio. "We have written statements, bank records showing payments from Edmund to Birch, dates and times of their meetings. Everything documented, verified, and witnessed by 3 independent solicitors." Edmund's face had gone from flushed to white. "You can't prove." "We can," Alara said, "and we will. You've spent weeks trying to destroy our engagement by exposing supposed deceptions. But the only real deception here is yours. You planted a spy. You manufactured scandals. You created elaborate lies, all because you're desperate to inherit Adrian's title and fortune. This was never about protecting the Vale family. It was about positioning yourself to replace him." The crowd's murmur was growing louder now, shifting decisively against Edmund. "You went too far," Adrian said quietly, but his voice somehow still reached every corner of the ballroom. "If you'd simply opposed our engagement honestly, if you'd raised legitimate concerns, we could have addressed them. But you chose espionage, deception, manipulation of innocent staff members. You turned this into a war, Edmund, and you lost." Edmund looked around wildly, seeing his support evaporating, his carefully constructed campaign collapsing. "You can't. This isn't—" "It's over," Helena said, her voice final as a judge's gavel. "Lord Carrington, you are no longer welcome in any Vale residence or at any family function. Your allowance from the Vale estate is hereby terminated, and if you attempt to spread any further lies about my stepson or his fiancée, we will pursue legal action for slander and defamation. Are we clear?" Edmund's mouth worked silently. Then, with a final look of pure hatred directed at both Adrian and Alara, he turned and fled the ballroom. The silence that followed his departure was absolute. Then Lord Haverford himself, their host, began to clap. Others joined slowly at first, then building into genuine applause. Not the polite acknowledgement of the parliamentary reception, but something deeper. Respect. Admiration. Recognition that they'd just witnessed a masterful dismantling of attempted social assassination. Lady Rothschild appeared at Alara's side, tears streaming down her face for the second time in as many weeks. "My dear girl, That was magnificent. You didn't just defend yourself, you turned the tables completely. We defended each other, Alara corrected, looking at Adrian. That's what partners do. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations and curious questions. People who'd been skeptical about their engagement now approached with genuine warmth. Women who'd dismissed Alara weeks ago now sought her conversation. Men who'd viewed Adrian as a confirmed bachelor now treated him with new respect. But the real victory wasn't in their acceptance. It was in the moment, near midnight, when Alara and Adrian stood alone on the Haverford Terrace, the same kind of terrace where this entire journey had begun months ago, and simply breathed. "We did it," Adrian said quietly. "Edmund's finished. No one will believe another word he says. We're free." "Free," Alara repeated, testing the word. It felt strange, foreign. She'd been fighting for so long that the absence of immediate threat felt almost disorienting. "What do we do with freedom?" Adrian turned to face her, his expression softer than she'd ever seen it. "We build something, not a defense or a strategy or a performance. Something real. Starting with an actual wedding." "When?" "As soon as possible. I've had enough of long engagements and strategic delays. I want to marry you, Alara, not because it's tactically sound or socially advantageous. Because I love you. Because you're the strongest, bravest, most infuriating person I've ever met. Because I don't want to spend another day without you being my wife in truth, not just in title." Alara felt tears prick her eyes, real ones this time, born of overwhelming relief and joy and the simple miracle of being chosen. 3 months ago, I was invisible. Now I'm standing here being proposed to for real by a man who actually sees me. How did this happen? "You happened," Adrian said, pulling her close. "You walked into an impossible situation and transformed it through sheer force of will. You turned a devil's bargain into a love story. You taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness. It's the foundation of genuine strength." "We taught each other," Alara corrected. "You showed me that survival isn't the same as living, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is risk everything for something real." He kissed her then, gentle and fierce and absolutely certain, and Alara knew with perfect clarity that this moment, this man, this life they were building together, was worth every humiliation she'd endured, every fear she'd faced, every risk she'd taken. They were married 6 weeks later in a ceremony that managed to be both intimate and impossibly grand, immediate family and close friends in attendance, but half of London society clamoring for invitations. Alara wore cream silk and carried white roses. Adrian wore formal black and looked at her like she was the only person in the world. Margaret served as maid of honor, her eyes bright with tears and relief. Duchess Helena sat in the front pew, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes suspiciously bright. Even Alara's mother, still fragile but significantly healthier now that the crushing weight of poverty had lifted, managed to smile through her own tears. When Adrian slid the wedding band onto Alara's finger, next to the sapphire engagement ring that had replaced a calculated fiction, she felt something settle into place. Not just security or status or social position, belonging. They honeymooned in Italy, spending 3 weeks in Venice and Florence, away from London's scrutiny and expectations. Away from scandal sheets and social warfare and the constant performance of being watched. Just 2 people learning how to be married, how to navigate disagreements without calculation, how to share space and silence and vulnerability without fear. "I keep expecting it to feel different," Alara admitted one evening as they sat on their villa's terrace, watching the Tuscan sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Like there should be some moment where I stop feeling like an imposter and start feeling like I actually belong in this life." Adrian's arm tightened around her shoulders. "When does that happen for you?" Alara thought about it. Remembered standing in her borrowed room at Thornbury House that first night, feeling like a fraud in expensive silk. Remembered the opera, the garden party, the parliamentary reception, all the moments when she'd been certain someone would expose her, dismiss her, send her back to invisibility. And then she remembered the moment she'd confronted Thomas Graves, the moment she'd stood before London society and admitted the truth of their arrangement, the moment she'd turned Edmund's trap inside out and claimed her power. "I think," she said slowly, It happened when I stopped trying to convince everyone I belonged and started acting like someone who did. When I stopped performing worthiness and started demanding recognition. That's when I fell in love with you, Adrian said quietly. At the garden party, when you walked straight into danger and transformed it into triumph, I watched you become someone formidable, and I thought, this woman doesn't need rescuing. She needs a partner worthy of her. Are you? Elara asked, teasing but also serious. Worthy of me? Probably not, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be. They returned to London 6 months after their wedding to find that the city had moved on to newer scandals. Edmund had retreated to the country in disgrace, his political ambitions destroyed, his social standing ruined. The story of his espionage and exposure had become the cautionary tale mothers told their ambitious sons. This is what happens when you let greed override honor. But the story of Elara and Adrian had become something else entirely, a romance that started with pragmatism and transformed into genuine partnership. A modern love story for a changing world, where intelligence and mutual respect mattered more than pedigree and performance. Elara found herself invited to serve on charitable committees, real positions with actual influence, not token appointments. Women sought her advice on navigating society's complexities. Young girls from fallen families wrote to her, asking how she'd survived, how she'd transformed herself. She answered every letter, shared every lesson, because she remembered what invisibility felt like, and she refused to let anyone else suffer it alone. 2 years after their wedding, Elara stood in the drawing room of Thornbury House, her home now, truly and completely, reading congratulatory notes on the birth of their daughter. Helena Margaret Vale, named for the 2 women who'd shaped Elara's transformation. Adrian entered with the baby in his arms, his expression suffused with the kind of wonder that came from holding something infinitely precious and terrifyingly fragile. She has your eyes, he said, settling into the chair beside Elara's. And probably your stubbornness. We're in trouble. Elara smiled, reaching out to touch her daughter's tiny hand. She'll need stubbornness. The world isn't kind to women, even ones born into privilege. She'll have to fight for everything, just in different ways than I did. Then we'll teach her how, Adrian said. How to be strong without being hard. How to be strategic without being cruel. How to demand respect while still offering kindness. He looked at Elara. We'll teach her what you taught me, that survival is important, but living is better. That vulnerability is strength. That the bravest thing you can do is choose truth over fear. And love over calculation, Elara added softly. Always that. Years passed. The scandal that had nearly destroyed them became family legend, the story Adrian and Elara told at dinner parties, laughing now at the absurdity of their beginning. Their daughter grew into a fierce, intelligent girl who inherited her mother's strategic mind and her father's unwavering integrity. 2 more children followed, a son and another daughter, and Thornbury House filled with noise and life and the kind of chaotic joy that comes from genuine love rather than careful performance. Duchess Helena lived to see all 3 grandchildren finally softening into something approaching warmth in her 70s, admitting to Elara one evening that orchestrating their original arrangement had been the best strategic move she'd ever made, even if it had worked out completely differently than planned. I thought I was creating a temporary alliance, Helena said, watching her grandchildren play in the garden. I didn't realize I was engineering a genuine partnership. You 2 actually did the impossible. You built a marriage worth having. Because we had no choice, Elara said. The deception forced us to be honest about everything else. We couldn't afford to lie about our feelings or our fears or our needs. That honesty became the foundation. Most couples build on fiction and hope the truth doesn't destroy them, Helena observed. You built on truth and let it strengthen you. Remarkable. Margaret married well, not to a fortune hunter or a desperate suitor, but to a kind man who valued her gentleness and supported her dreams. Their mother lived long enough to see both her daughters settled and secure, passing peacefully in her sleep with Elara holding her hand. The poverty that had once defined them became distant memory, but Elara never forgot it. She established a charitable foundation to help families facing financial ruin, providing not just money, but education, connections, opportunities, helping other invisible women become visible again. 20 years after their wedding, Elara stood once more at a society ball, but this time as an established duchess, a respected philanthropist, a woman whose opinion carried weight and whose presence commanded attention. A young woman approached her, barely 20, wearing a gown that had clearly been altered and re-altered, her expression caught between hope and terror. She reminded Alara so forcefully of herself that it was like looking through time. "Your Grace," the girl said, curtsying awkwardly. "I'm sorry to intrude, but I had to speak with you. I've read about your story, how you survived your family's fall, how you built yourself back up. I wondered if, that is, I hoped you might have advice." Alara smiled, seeing her younger self reflected in this girl's desperate courage. "What's your name?" "Catherine. Catherine Morrison. My father died last year. Debts. We've lost everything. I'm here tonight only because a distant cousin took pity on us, but I can feel everyone staring, judging, dismissing me." Her voice cracked. "How did you bear it? How did you survive being invisible?" Alara took Catherine's hand, leading her toward the terrace. The same kind of terrace where so many transformations had begun. "The truth? I didn't just survive being invisible. I learned to use it. When people don't see you, they underestimate you. They reveal truths they'd never share with someone they considered threatening. And when you finally step into the light, you do it with knowledge and strategy they never saw coming." "But how do I step into the light? I have no prospects, no money, no power." "Neither did I," Alara said gently. "But I had intelligence, courage, the willingness to take an impossible risk when an opportunity presented itself. And I had the sense to recognize that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is also the most necessary." Catherine's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I'm afraid." "Good. Fear means you understand the stakes. But don't let fear paralyze you. Let it sharpen you. Make you strategic. Make you strong." Alara squeezed her hand. "And know this, you're not alone. There are women like us throughout society, women who've survived what seemed unsurvivable. Find them, build alliances, support each other. That's how we change the world, not by fighting alone, but by refusing to let anyone remain invisible." She gave Catherine the name of her charitable foundation's director, an introduction to 3 influential women who'd help her, and a promise that invisibility was only temporary for those brave enough to demand visibility. When Catherine left, her shoulders a little straighter, her expression a little less defeated, Adrian appeared at Alara's side. "Rescuing strays again?" he asked, affection evident in his voice. "Helping someone who reminds me of who I was," Alara corrected, "before a cunning duchess made me an impossible offer and changed my entire life. How do you think her story will end? However she chooses to write it. That's the thing about survival. It's never just about enduring. It's about transformation, becoming someone new, someone stronger." Adrian's arm circled her waist, pulling her close. "You certainly transformed, from invisible woman to duchess, from desperate to powerful, from survival to triumph." "We transformed," Alara corrected. "Together. That was always the secret, wasn't it? Not that we survived individually, but that we learned to build something together. A partnership that was stronger than either of us alone." "Still the most dangerous decision I ever made," Adrian said. "Falling in love with you." "And the best?" "Unquestionably." They stood together on the terrace as London spread out beneath them, the city that had tried to erase her, tested him, challenged them both. But they'd survived it, mastered it, transformed it into something they could shape rather than simply endure. Because that was the final truth Alara had learned through all the deception and danger, all the strategic moves and desperate gambles. Power didn't come from being born to it, or buying it, or even demanding it. Power came from refusing to be erased, from standing in rooms that tried to make you invisible and insisting on being seen, from turning calculated bargains into genuine partnerships, from choosing truth over fear, even when fear was safer, from transforming survival into a life worth living. She'd started as a ghost in silk, a woman society had forgotten. She'd become a duchess who reshaped her fate. And in the harsh arena of power, she'd proved one truth above all. The strongest alliances are born in fire. The most genuine love grows from honest foundations. And the women the world tries to erase are often the ones who end up rewriting the rules entirely. Alara Whitcomb Vale, Duchess of Thornbury, had been given a devil's bargain and turned it into a triumph. Not because she'd been perfect or fearless or even particularly lucky, but because when the world tried to make her choose between survival and dignity, between pragmatism and love, between safety and truth, she'd refused to choose. She'd demanded everything, and somehow, impossibly, she'd won. The game wasn't just won, it was over, and she'd never been anyone's pawn. She'd become a queen,